I have absolutely nothing to say whatsoever, and yet I will make it seem like I do.
B2B services and operating excellence.
A headcount that you need to be considered a disruptor in your marketplace.
There's an ownership stake in an underlying network.
It had a very leveraged effect.
Welcome to the Dejargonizer. I'm your host, Amir Mizrach. In this podcast, I speak to startup founders. I subject myself to their tech jargon to try and decipher what their company really does. I do this to find out if there's a bigger story there that matters to broader audiences, like you. Today, we're speaking with the team behind Alfred's Food, a food technology company taking a novel approach to trying to tackle problems with our food industry and our food systems. What they're doing is adapting film coating technology taken from the pharmaceutical industry that could potentially overcome the key barriers that have limited alternative proteins to niche market status. What makes Alfred's approach intriguing is that it doesn't require novel ingredients or major regulatory breakthroughs, potentially allowing for the rapid scaling and market entry of alternative proteins that taste good and feel like the real thing. Does that broadly sound okay for a very broad audience before we jump into specifics?
I think it sounds brilliant.
Great. Let's do just a quick round of introductions. Gofna, will you kick us off?
Sure. I'm Gofna. I'm the CEO of Alfred's Food Tech. My background is from food industry. I spent most of my career with Nestle, leading different units in Israel, outside of Israel. Outside of R&D, I was also in operations, among other jobs, the factory manager. And my last job in Nestle was open innovation manager. This is where I was in contact with a lot of mostly Israeli companies, mostly, of course, in food tech. This is where I first met Alfred's almost in day one. And I got to know the company, the great team, and great technology. And when I was asked to join, I was very happy to do that.
Everyone's heard of Nestle, but can you just give us a profile of Nestle? It's one of the world's biggest food companies, right?
The biggest centered in Switzerland, and the company that came up with many, many food categories over the years. Nestle was founded 150 years ago. And since then, it's leading different categories such as infant nutrition, culinary products, coffee, of course, breakfast cereal, many other food categories.
And you worked for a while in the part of Nestle that did the cereals, and then you moved up into kind of the food innovation part of it, right?
I was in all kind of categories. I started with Nestle ice cream, actually. I moved into cereal technologies. In Israel, outside of Israel, I went back into factory management of actually chilled salads at the category. And when I was leading open innovation, it was really coming across all kind of innovative technologies that are developed outside of the company. And then the connection of those companies to Nestle for various collaboration projects.
Amazing. Thank you. Marina, give us a quick intro.
I'm Marina. I'm the CTO of Alfred. In my background, I work at the two biggest pharmaceutical companies in Israel, Teva and also the Excel Pharma, mainly with R&D, various management, research and development roles. And in the Excel Pharma, I transfer the product that I developed to production. So everything happened from the development till the launch of the products.
Amazing. I think I'd like to start, Gofna, with you. If you could just give us why do we need innovation here? What is the real big step back problem if you're looking at this from 50,000 feet up in the air and you're looking at the food system, the food industry, the planet? Like, what is the big picture problem that you're trying to solve?
In the last more or less 10 years, there was an understanding that the food system has various aspects of impact that need to be addressed in different ways. To start with, it was really the concern about global warming and the understanding that the food industry has a major effect on global warming, mostly raising cows. That is where there is a strong impact on global warming. But then there is also a growing concern about the availability of nutrients, mostly of protein, because on the one hand, you need to feed more people. On the other hand, there is an increase in the consumption of the animal-based protein. So it's really about global warming. It's about concerns of food scarcity. And, it hasn't gone away in consideration of animal welfare. So this is something that we always had in mind, and the concern continues to be there. So from all those perspectives, I would say there is an understanding that the food system has to introduce changes that will allow all those concerns to be reduced or to be addressed. There is also an understanding that if we shift more towards plant-based nutrition from relying just on animal proteins nutrition, then we actually address all those concerns together.
Okay, so the big picture problem is that the way that we farm, the way that we produce food is on the one hand quite dangerous to the climate, the soil. It's also not producing enough protein for a growing global population. And then part of the answer is to replace a lot of that animal protein with plant-based protein. Does that sound about right?
Yes, absolutely.
And it seems that one of the fundamental barriers that have prevented more plant-based proteins from, appearing in the supermarket shelves and restaurants is, I guess, taste, texture. It just hasn't really achieved that breakthrough. Is that accurate?
I would say that the biggest barrier we see is the consumer's willingness to adapt and to continue consuming those products, because products have been out there for a long time and we do see different trends and consumers willing to try. And every time, new products come up, we have seen consumers trying the different plant-based products, but at a certain moment, repeat consumption is not really out there. And the level of people actually combining plant-based nutrition into their diet hasn't gone significantly higher. And this is where we want to bring the change. This is where we want to actually increase the consumption for consumers to try a new product and adapt them and continue consume them, and gradually to be able to reduce the consumption of animal-based proteins.
Got it. I guess an example of what you're talking about how plant-based proteins haven't really quite hit the mainstream, taken over, is this data point that plant-based milk has captured around 20% market share in some regions, not all of them, while plant-based cheese sits at around just 2%. Can you kind of just explain where we are in that journey? What's happening there? Because 20% plant-based milk seems okay, but there's still 80% there isn't, and cheese doesn't seem to cut it at all.
Right. So, the driving force is always the consumer. We are looking to what resonates with the consumers, what concerns consumers have, and then what are the considerations that are super important for the consumer. The starting point is always taste and texture. This has to be addressed to the consumers. We need to tick that box without any compromise. And the eat experience is something very complex. It's really all about the entire, how you anticipate the product to taste. What does it taste like from first bite to the last bite? What is the taste that you have remaining with you? When you think about what you just ate, how does it last with you? All those considerations of the taste and texture experience are super important to the consumers and have to be very satisfying. Then there is the nutritional consideration, which is also important to the consumer. It's a complex topic again. There isn't just one box in nutrition, but the overall understanding of the consumer is that it has to be good for the body, something that I would like to eat, that I feel that I'm doing good for myself. And then there is other considerations, such as cost, which is super important. It has to be competitive, I would say. There is a certain margin consumer is agreeing to pay, especially when the other considerations are well met. But there is a limit to that. And this has to be taken into a very strong consideration. And food familiarity is important. The more it's something that I recognize as something that I know, that I love, that I grew up with, that resonates sometimes with my childhood, this is where my willingness to try and to continue consuming this product goes higher. So when you talked about milk, I think plant-based milk really answers all those considerations from the consumers. This is why indeed, the level of penetration of adoption is very, very high in many, many markets. And this is why some other categories just do not yet get to this level. Oftentimes, it's a taste and texture that need to be sharpened and upgraded. And then the nutritional consideration behind the product have to be considered. And of course, the other concerns that I mentioned.
Right. Great. What I think I'd like to do now that we've kind of looked at just the overview is going a little bit more specific into Alfred's and in kind of two steps. Gofna, if you could give us a picture of what Alfred's is doing And then, Marina, maybe you could take us into the box, walk us into the machine. What happens when you turn the switch on?
What we're doing is to use existing ingredients, but arrange them in a different way. So we end up with different products coming out of our process. It's important to mention that it's a technology platform. It can create the taste and textures that we aspire to deliver very close to the origin. A unique feature in our technology is the fact that the technology covers, disguises any off notes. That allows us to add high percentages of plant-based proteins without sensing any of the typical notes that are part of those ingredients. So in a nutshell, what we can do is to deliver on the taste and texture very close to the original products, very high qualities like the consumers expect it to be, and to add into our products the high percentages of proteins, which are what we believe is super important when we talk about the nutritional considerations of our consumers. This, I would say, highlights the unique selling propositions of the products that we can make thanks to our technology. Our first prototypes are hard cheeses and cold cut, but as I said, it's a platform. There is room for innovation in many, many different directions with our technology.
Okay, so this being the dejargonizer, the show is the dejargonizer. There are a couple of jargon words there that, Marina, hopefully you can help us. So the one obviously is platform. Platform could mean so many things. And then notes, off notes. Marina, take us into how Alfred does what it does, maybe with an actual example of something that, you produce, you put in ingredients. What are they? What happens? How does it work?
We use technology that called film coating and drying. It's a roll-to-roll technology, also used in other industries such as pharmaceutical, to produce nicotine patches. It's also used in textile to coat materials and the different fabrics, and even in the electronic world for coating of batteries. So the technology is well known as a technological principle, but no one used it in the alternative protein space. We actually brought this technology to this space, and we saw that it can solve a lot of different problems that exist in this space of off notes, textures, and others. And what we actually do,
I'm sorry, can you tell me what off notes are?
Yeah, of course. So usually plant-based proteins such as pea protein, soy protein, they have a very specific taste, beany taste of peas, taste of soy, and we don't want to eat cheese with the taste of beans. We want to eat cheese with the taste of cheese, with a specific aroma and taste. So we don't want these off notes or off taste. We want the original taste. So this is the off note, the taste that you don't want to feel. What we actually do, we take all the materials that we need for the final product, such as protein, it can be pea, but other proteins as well, fats, different flavor additives, and also color additives. And we have additional functional ingredients. We mix them together for a preparation of emulsion with the standard processes using different mixers and homogenizers. And then we pump this emulsion into the machine. And this is our special and unique technology, the film coating machine. In the machine, we coat all the material on a hot plate. And the plate is going through a line of ovens and dry some of the water. In our case, is different from others because usually you produce cold cuts or cheese by producing a blocks. In our case, we produce a film. Imagine a long carpet or towel that's going out of the machine, and then we just have to cut it to the final shape and not to slice it as usually, and to pack it, of course. Very important to emphasize that our products are very physically stable. We can froze them and defroze them, and we don't have any bad effect on the texture.
So it sounds like you have a recipe for plant-based cheese that you can put in peas or other plant-based nutrients and proteins, including a whole bunch of other additives, homogenizers, and it goes through the system and comes out I'd like to just take a little detour here, if I may. One of the ideas and central concepts behind alternative protein is that it's healthy for the planet, healthier for the consumer, for the human. But I did hear you talk about additives, color additives, flavor additives, homogenizers. I guess there's trade-offs here, right? Is it really a healthier alternative if you're using all these other chemicals?
So actually, I really believe that those products are healthy. If I will compare them to plant-based alternatives that we have currently on the market, so usually the plant-based cheese is produced with the starch and the coconut oil. So there is no protein there. There is a very high amount of saturated fat, also colors and flavor additives. So if I will compare our products to those options, I can say that we have 18% of plant-based protein. So it's very, very important in comparison to our
18?
18%, yeah, 18% of plant-based protein, which is almost as the animal-based product. And it's very, very important to the consumer. We have less saturated fat because we can use also liquid fats and solid fats. In addition, the colors and the flavor additives that we usually use are natural, like beta-carotene or beetroot colors. So I believe those materials are not problematic for the consumer, but the added value of the protein is very, very important, and people look for protein in their food.
Got it. Let's go back from that detour. Gofna, you've worked in food manufacturing. Could you describe kind of your standard food factory, right? The kind of machines and the kind of processes that work there. And then, Marina, could you maybe compare that and contrast that with Alfred's food factory, like how you're building that?
Yeah, I think it's a very important notion. I mean, I actually really connect with that because indeed there is a lot of existing processes in the food manufacturing, all the principles that Marina mentioned before, which are mixing of ingredients or shaping the material into the final product that you want, or stabilizing that, or drying that, or packaging. All those are existing processes in the food industry. So what is indeed, I think, very unique about Alfred's is that we are using existing principles. And when we go into a high-scale manufacturing, we can either rely on some processes and machinery that is existing in the factories in which we will produce, or it can be easily implemented because it does not require manufacturing principles that have not been there yet in food, and therefore we need many years, different regulatory hurdles, or very high levels of investments to go into high-scale manufacturing. The fact that Alfred is using technology that is actually used in many industries, we have experimented that in different locations, and we have also been witness of that work in other industries to know that it is something that is easy to implement and to scale up, and is not going to be a huge challenge for the industry to adapt. I think that is one of the key, I would say, features of the technology of Alfred's, the ability to very quickly implement that in the food industry and scale it up to high levels as the products get into the market.
Does that mean, I'm just trying to distill it, does that mean that Alfred's can use or does use the same kind of food manufacturing machinery and processes that the traditional food industry uses?
Yes, definitely the same principles. In some cases, like mixing, it's exactly even the same machinery that exists in many industries. And even when you talk about the unique part of our technology, it's still machinery that is in use either in other close industries like pharma or even in the food industry, but need to be adapted and made fit to produce really our final product.
So you're not reinventing food manufacturing. Like, let's say I've seen technology companies, food technology companies that are completely reinventing things, like they're taking animal cells and growing meat, in a lab, right? Or they're taking proteins from the wild and creating new food powders from them to put into other food. Can you just describe for the audience the two poles, right? There's the traditional food industry manufacturing, and then there's this way out, far out food tech reinventing food industry and maybe position Alfred's in that?
Let me try and describe it like that, and then Marina can, of course, elaborate on that. We usually look at three families of technology areas, okay? One would be the application of plant-based ingredients, like we're doing. And that can be either developing new plant-based ingredients per se, like new plant-based proteins that have not been used in the industry, or in new ways to produce the final product, but relying on close-by principles. This is where we are. You have said, that it means that we are not reinventing. I think we are reinventing in the final product, because coming up with products like ours that are one step, I would say, ahead in terms of how similar it is to the original product and how well it answers the consumer's needs on the taste and texture and the ability to add a protein. I think we are delivering a reinvention in the product delivery. But from the industry perspective, it does mean that it's not that complicated in the end, and therefore it can happen quickly and to high scale. This is one area. It's processing plant-based ingredients or coming up with new plant-based ingredients. Then we're talking about an industry of precision fermentation. This is where many different companies and technologies are actually using microorganisms and modifying, if you want, the microorganisms to produce what you want, the final product. So if you want to mimic the protein that is produced from cows, you could teach microorganisms to produce the same type of protein, and then you can finally get this protein and use it in different food applications. And precision fermentation indeed is a very advanced technology and is now being developed by many companies. And the last one, I would say, when you look at those categories, is indeed cellular agriculture, when you actually produce meat or tissue or, different tissues in a lab and then maybe in a manufacturing area. And this is an even more advanced technology, I would say, from the level of complexity. And there is companies indeed that are active in this area.
Marina, could you unpack all of that into an example of how Alfred's makes its cheese, for instance, right? Everything from the ingredients that you're using to the process without, divulging all your IP. And then how do you actually mimic the taste and texture of the cheese that you're producing?
So in the beginning, when we want to plan the product itself, we usually took nutritional values from the animal-based cheese, of course. We look on the protein content, the fat content, the carbohydrates content, and we want to be similar as much as possible. We want to mimic that, the ingredients. So we start with the formulation that will give us the chance to mimic it. We take plant-based protein in the correct amount, the fat, the flavors, the colors, of course, to reach our target. I will give an example. In plant-based cheese, we use beta-carotene, and in standard plant-based cheese, they also use beta-carotene. And even in the animal-based cheese, they use annatto, other yellow color. So this is the standard thinking of the animal-based and also the regular plant-based cheese. And then we mix all the ingredients and homogenize them to produce a very homogeneous emulsion. And it's also similar to the other plant-based cheese producers. But then the problem of the plant-based cheese currently exists in the market that they actually can't add a lot of protein to their product. And the reason is that they will have a very, very viscous solution or emulsion that is very problematic for the downstream afterwards. It's very viscous. It's very hard to homogenize it with the different flavors and colors. And also afterwards in the final product, you will have a lot of off-taste that we mentioned before. In our case, because we use the film coating and drying technology, we evaporate some of the water. Our emulsion is much less viscous than of the competitors. So we can homogenize it very, very well. And then to use our special process of film coating and drying and get a final product. Additional difference that we have from the standard plant-based cheese is that we don't have any stabilization time that needed. Usually plant-based cheese have to be 2-3 months stabilized in a chilled condition. In our case, the product is ready to eat from the machine, and we can save time and energy So it's very effective. And then we just have a standard cutting for the final shape. For cheese, it's very, very easy. And packaging as a regular cheese, plant-based or animal-based, we don't have any problem with stability, shelf life, and any other issues.
Amazing. I like that. Let's talk about the market, the business, the consumers, the challenges. I feel like we've done a good job in the what and the how. So, Gofna, when we were preparing, you said that Alfred is positioning its approach as integration rather than the replacement of animal proteins, which is kind of a more, I guess, a middle of the road philosophy. Is that the business strategy here, or is that just because of the consumer taste and the way that the food industry is built? Or do you see yourself as growing and developing into that kind of more ambitious, changing the food industry later on? Take us into the strategy there.
Yeah, I believe we're really well posed to make a difference, to make a change. But like you rightly said, it's more understanding, the consumer's mindset. And when you look at the consumer's aspirations in markets like, different European markets or the United States, of course, here in Israel, we hear that about 50%, sometimes even more, of the consumers want to reduce the consumption of animal-based proteins. They do not necessarily want to replace it all over, but they do want to make a reduction in order to be better for the planet, to be better for the animals, for all those considerations, What we are looking to do is actually to answer those needs from the consumers. I think this is the case where we don't want to necessarily educate the consumers to make a huge radical change, but we want to ride on the wave of what the consumers actually want to do and expect to do. The reasons that consumers are not doing, this reduction to the level that we would like them to do is because obviously they have not yet met the right products or good enough products to do that. What we bring in is this next generation of products that answer all the different requirements from the consumers. And this is where we will bring this combination of coming in to the consumer's diet and allowing them to reduce sometimes, the consumption of animal-based products and integrate that in a simple and harmonious ways into their daily diet.
Can you be a little bit more specific about the kind of, I guess, consumer disappointments or holdbacks with earlier plant-based products?
Yeah, it's always been, the truth of the food industry, that it always starts with taste and texture. We call taste the king and texture the queen of the food industry. Those have to be met. There is no compromise on that. And even if you're willing to maybe sometimes, eat something that you don't think is 100% meeting your requirements, the next time you will not reconsume this product, you will not buy it again, and we won't see this adoption that we're looking to see. So taste and texture are always would drive consumers' decision to start with. But then we've learned that consumers actually are looking for the nutritional considerations. We did talk a lot before about the protein. And like Marina emphasized, the fact that we're switching to consumption of plant-based product means that we also expect to see a good level of protein in the product to make sure that when we replace the animal-based protein, there is a new source of protein in the product. And that is very important to the consumers, very important in the consumer's decision-making.
Let's talk about the cost, because it always seems to me that when you look at a supermarket, you have your regular chicken, meat, eggs, all that kind of stuff that has a certain price. But then when you try and do something a little bit healthier, it's organic or plant-based, the price can double, triple, right? And that is a major barrier to a lot of people. How does Alfred's look at that whole problem?
In Alfred, we're very minded about the cost consideration and where we have to be. We've invested a lot of work to understand what are the cost targets that we need to address and to make sure that we actually meet those cost targets. We really go product by product and understand the sensitivity and the specificity of that whole product. You talk about cheese, there is one consideration. You talk about very premium, I would say, cold cuts, which we can also deliver. There is a different consideration. And we really make sure that in each one of those product groups, we actually meet the cost targets and we don't exceed the margin the consumer is willing to pay. The technology allows us to do that. We are really very flexible on the ingredients we use. we can use all types of ingredients. It's not that we came up, with one novel ingredient that is very expensive and dictating the cost that we have to anticipate from the final product, but we are able to use all kind of ingredients.
Like which ones?
Like we can use one type of protein, or we can use another type of protein. We can use a protein when we go into manufacturing.
Like what?
Like pea. Pea allows us to also meet very nicely all those different considerations, cost included.
Marina, could you briefly describe how do you go from creating cheese to cold cuts? And just a quick detour. I'm assuming it's completely kosher because there's no meat and there's no milk there, right? But how do you reconfigure the system to do that?
As Gofna mentioned, we have a platform and not the technology for a specific product. So actually, the production of cheese and cold cuts are not very different from each other. We use a bit different ingredients. We use flavors suitable for cold cuts instead of cheese flavors. We use different colors. Instead of yellow colors, we use red colors. We use beetroot and radish for that. So the composition is a bit different to give us the flavors and aroma that needed for cold cut. And some of the process parameters should be adjusted to reach a different texture of the final product.
You're already producing cheese, cold cuts. What else is in the pipeline? What other kind of foods are you thinking of? And then how do you get that into market more?
So, of course, in addition to cheese and cold cuts, we can produce with the same technology and exactly same machine also whole cuts, different kinds of whole cuts, very fibrous that look really, really similar to the real thing. Also, we can develop...
Whole cuts, you mean steaks?
Yes, I mean chicken fillet, for example, and other options, even salmon. But in addition to that, our technology can be also an enabler for other technologies that you mentioned before, such as the culture, meat, and also the precision fermentation, because we can take those cells from the cultured meat section and introduce them to our product instead of the flavoring materials. And then we will have a very good effect of texture from our platform and the aroma and the taste from the cultured meat sector, for example. In addition, we can take the recombinant protein produced from the precision fermentation that Gofna mentioned and use this protein instead of the plant-based protein and produce a very good cheese.
Both of you come from kind of traditional food and pharma industries. Gofna, what is the market opportunity here for Alfred's and similar companies? What is the TAM, the total addressable market for you guys?
So we have actually many total addressable markets. This is a flexible technology, so we can produce and address a variety of food categories. There's still a huge space because even the milk category, which is maybe the highest, like you said, in adoption, is still at 20%. But when you look at categories like meat in general, cold cuts, cheese in general, it's still very much a blue ocean in many of those categories. And anytime that companies like ours will bring in innovation that addresses in a better way, I would say, or more advanced way, consumer requirements, then the level of adoption would increase. So total addressable market is huge. Meat is a 1 trillion business and the level of adoption is very low. Cheeses on its own, with a couple of hundred of billions. And then the room to grow in those spaces is huge.
So what are the major challenges that are kind of standing in your way now, the things that you're trying to work through, whether it's technological, consumer taste, regulatory, just market challenges? Just lay out what the road ahead and what the challenges are there for you.
Right. We are now in an exciting time where we're actually taking our product out from the lab after a few years of mastering the technology, optimizing the first products that can come out with the technology. We are now in the phase of scaling up and commercial manufacturing and taking the products really to the consumers, to the markets. This is super exciting. We have the right team. Besides Marina, of course, we have super gifted people in operations, in manufacturing, process engineering that really have all the skills needed in order to scale up and take those products to commercial manufacturing. The other focus that we haven't mentioned it before, but our commercial strategy is B2B. We can take it to all kinds of directions to bring this next generation of food products. And we are looking to collaborate with food companies that already have the reach to the market, that have the brands, the reach to the consumers, the supply chains, everything that it takes, and also to companies that have manufacturing capabilities and want to deliver final products based on our technology.
I was going to ask you about the reaction from the major food industry players and Nestle, right? Your previous employer. Is that door open to Alfred's, or is it like, leave us alone, we know what we're doing?
Alfred's has been a B2B company almost from day one. We've worked with a lot of industry players and we have developed different products based on different projects with industry players. Of course, I cannot mention any names specifically because this relies, in things that are very confidential. But we do have a very strong links to many industry players, and we're looking now how to even strengthen those collaborations and to take a product to the market with different partners. In Israel is our beta site. This is actually, market where people are very open to plant-based products, very open also to innovation, and it's very close to us. So it's very important for us to scale up our products and test them first, here, because it's very accessible to us. But on the same time, we are in different relations with companies outside of Israel.
Marina, can you describe what your major technological challenges here to scaling, to production, and also, I guess, the platform itself needs to be able to be flexible for different kinds of products? Just take us into the engineering and science of that.
Okay, so scale up, it's always a challenge, a lot of experiments, a lot of data analysis, and a lot of planning. But from the side of the technology, I can't really say that we have major challenges. I think the same challenge that every technology has, to find the parameters for mixing in bigger scale, parameters for the coating and drying. But I can see something very challenging that can be an obstacle for us to reach the final target with a good product. Also, shelf life looks very promising. I'm really happy with that. I believe we will go to a very big scale in the future. I think that our challenges are really similar to every life science production process.
Interesting. Okay, as we're heading into the last few minutes, I'd like to take a minute, Gofnai. What's different about Alfred? Alfred's is also in the alternative protein, the plant-based protein industry, but you've mentioned a lot of different things here that it's doing. Just give us kind of the core difference. What makes Alfred's different?
It's a great question. I think, it's always a combination of things. To start with, I think Alfred did come up with a technology that can and does bring a real difference with the products, the quality of the products, and addressing all the different considerations from the consumers that we've mentioned. I think the fact that we actually tick all those boxes is super important because all those boxes are important. I think the speed that technology can be implemented is super important because it's very important for a new company to be able to demonstrate it very quickly. The fact that we don't have any regulatory barriers or the availability of the process is unique. And last but definitely not least is really our people. People that first really bring all the different expertise needed to to develop and implement a new technology. Marina is really leading a very unique R&D team that comes with this very unique combination of pharma and food people. And this pharma mindset really allows the innovation to go in a different way than what is traditionally implemented by other companies, and it brings very unique capabilities.
What's the next milestone, the upcoming milestone for the company? Are you able to just give us a quick hint on that?
Yeah, maybe the biggest one is that we're actually going to be in the retail market in Israel very soon. We're talking about weeks away from now. That is super exciting. I seen in my mind going into a supermarket and seeing Alfred products on the shelves. We have to demonstrate, from A to Z that the product can be manufactured, sold, be present, get the consumer feedbacks that we're looking to get. We are developing now the partnerships with different commercial companies and going very soon to go into collaboration and sales with those companies as well in Israel and outside of Israel.
So in a few weeks, potentially, if all goes well, I'll be able to go into a supermarket and see Alfred's, cheese, cold cuts?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
All right. And it will look the same? Will the branding and advertising be very this is plant-based? Are you going to make that a virtue?
We're going to highlight that it's plant-based, obviously, because this is what, first consideration is, but we're going to also highlight the other unique characteristics that we have in the product, the real novelty that we bring. And that together with the final eating experience of the consumer, I'm very confident that it will make a difference.
Brilliant. That sounds great. I personally wish you the best of luck. I think it's just great to see more people from the traditional food industry and the life science industry actually getting into this area. So is there anything that you think that I've missed, any area that you feel like, we should have spoken about that?
We really covered it. And I want to thank you for the opportunity, Amir, and for this platform to present and explain the jargonize a bit about what's behind the Alfred's. And thank you for the opportunity. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you both.
It was a pleasure.